From Portland, Oregon, this is GovLove, a podcast about local government. GovLove is produced by ELGL, the Engaging Local Government Leaders Network. We engage the brightest minds in local government. I'm Kirsten Wyatt, a fellow at the Beck Center for Social Impact and Innovation at Georgetown University, and I'm also the ELGL co-founder. Today, I'm joined by Marina Nitze, a co-author of the new book, Hack Your Bureaucracy. Marina, welcome to GovLove.
Thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Today, we'll talk about Marina's new book, her experiences working in government, and her realistic and practical advice for GovLove listeners. But first, let's get started with a lightning round. What is your most controversial, non-political opinion?
I hate pillows. Bed pillows, sofa pillows. I hate pillows of all kinds.
What? Do you just sleep flat on the mattress?
Yes, I do. I think they get in the way. They're hard to clean. I don't know. I don't get pillows.
Wow. Okay. I will say that this, I really believe after more than 500 episodes, this is a GovLove first.
Well, you said controversial, non-political. So that's what I was thinking of. Yeah.
Nailed it. All right. And then what is a food that most people like, but you do not?
Chocolate. I hate chocolate.
In all forms?
All forms.
Okay. Are you more of a savory person, or is it just chocolate that you don't like?
I love cheese, so I guess
Okay.
I am more of a savory person. But even like cheese and chocolate, like a chocolate covered cheesecake or something, no way. Like I would rather just have a cheesecake.
Okay. And then last lightning round question, what was the first music purchase that you made independently, and what format was it on?
I saved up my babysitting money for a big purchase at Circuit City, where I got, a boom box that played CDs for the first time and a collection of CDs that some of which I bought out of peer pressure, like Nirvana, that I didn't actually listen to, but I thought it would make me cool with the boys. Spoiler, it did not. But then music that I really did like, which was Weezer's Blue album, because I had gotten hooked on Buddy Holly, because anybody that had Windows 95 may recall that was one of the 2 music videos that came on that CD. So I would play it pretty much nonstop.
Wow. So those are, lots of great memories in that response. Circuit City, CDs, boom boxes, Weezer, Windows 95. That was chock full of information.
Yeah, it dates me certainly, but.
All right. And then I have to throw in one off the cuff lightning round question. Can you share with us how to pronounce your last name using the example that GovLove wonky nerds would love?
Yeah, it's Nitze, like the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration.
Thank you for that. Before we started recording, listeners, Marina shared that, and I just knew it was something that we had to make sure we included on this episode. So Marina, let's get started. And why don't you tell us more about your career path?
Yeah, mine was fairly unconventional. I've been self-employed since I was literally 12 years old. I started making websites for soap opera stars who admittedly did not know that I was 12 at the time, but it was kind of just at the start of the internet where I was making fan pages on, like the AOL members sites. And then I did such a good job, and there were not very many of us making such fan sites, that different actors and actresses reached out to make their official sites. So I had a pretty good website making business going, again, from the time I was 12. And then I love efficiency. I love lists. I love business process automation. I've been that way literally since I was born. And so as I got more skilled in web development and learned Perl initially to make soap opera games like Bingo and Hangman, but then I started learning how to transfer them to business automation. And so I started doing a bunch of consulting. Fast forward till I was 26 years old, I heard about this program called the Presidential Innovation Fellows. Todd Park, who was the CTO of the United States, announced it on TechCrunch Disrupt. And they said if you sent in your resume, you'd be added to their mailing list. So I thought, never in a billion years would I be picked to be a White House fellow. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm self-employed. I live in Seattle. But I sent in my resume. And a few months later, I got a phone call from Richard Culata at the Department of Education asking me to be his fellow. But I had to be in D.C. on Tuesday. This was Thursday. And I decided that was just crazy enough that I was in for an adventure that was just going to be 6 months. I was going to be in DC for just 6 months. So I joined up as a PIF at the Department of Ed. 6 months after I started there, I became a senior advisor in the White House Office of Science Technology Policy. And 6 months after that, I became the Chief Technology Officer of the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, where I stayed until 2017. I left the Obama administration the same time the president did because I was a political appointee. And now I do two things. I'm a partner in a small firm called Layer Olive, and we do IT crisis consulting. And then most of my time is spent doing foster care reform at New America.
And I want to rewind. Tell our listeners, when you submitted that resume, kind of, on a lark, you did something a little bit different to try to make it stand out. Talk to us about that, because to me, it gives us some insight into who you are and the creativity you infuse into everything you do.
Yeah, and I think this must be a sign that I had some modicum of hope that maybe I could be picked, even though all the facts seemed against the idea of me being a conventional candidate. I went on Graphic River, which is a website of resume templates, and I spent $3 whole on a resume template that was blue, and so it printed out "I'm Marina" in very big blue letters. And by no means did the blue resume was why I was picked, but in a pile of 600, multiple people still remember seeing that resume today and saying it certainly made sure that they saw it. And it was an early indicator to me of the power of visual design, which is something that I do a lot. I did a lot at the VA. I do a lot in foster care, because even just frankly having a font that's not Times New Roman or Arial can make something stand out just enough that in a stack of papers or a stack of PDFs, people will pay more attention to it and engage.
Well, and clearly, likely a skill that that you learned while building soap opera websites.
I hadn't connected those dots, but I think you are right. And back then, in the early days of the internet, websites were never quite beautiful, right? It was about being functional. I am a terrible designer, so thank God for tools like Canva today. And frankly, thank God for my teammates that are really good visual designers and take my ideas and make them look fabulous.
And I just have to ask, why soap operas to get started? Were you just an avid viewer and you thought this is a place where you could deploy your skills, or was there some other reason that was your niche, focus when you were first getting started at 12 years old?
I was honestly just an avid fan. And so I would go on the AOL message board, and I would see different people would make sites for their favorite couples or their favorite characters. And I got in on that saying, I want them for my favorite characters. And then I love tasks, right? So then it became a thing with an agenda and a to-do list, and I would add games and fan fiction and images and things like that. And that's where I'm someone that very much learns by doing, as opposed to reading or watching or listening. And so that worked really well for me to build my skill set pretty quickly.
So let's dive in and start with your paperclip story. And hopefully our listeners will get to hear this and then read it in a little bit more detail in the book. But would love to hear more, and for our listeners to learn about the Find Your Paperclip story.
Sure. So when I started as the Chief Technology Officer of the VA is the size of a Fortune 10 company. It's the largest healthcare system in the world. It's very large. And you would think that the CTO would get a lot of resources and team members to do his or her work. I was told that my job description when I started was to redefine the art of the possible for how America honors and serves its veterans. So no small task.
No.
But to do that, I had a $0 budget, and I had 0 team members, 0 employees. And so I wasn't quite sure what to do. And I'm sitting in my bare office. I tried to get a dry erase board because I love dry erase boards. And it turned out that my $99 office budget was not enough to buy a $105 GSA whiteboard. So all I had, without exaggeration, was a pile of paper clips in my desk. And every time I stared at those paper clips, I was reminded of the story of a blogger who, through a succession of trades, bartered his way from a literal red paper clip to a house that he could live in. And so I was kind of sitting there looking at my pile of I don't think anyone's going to literally take my paper clip, but what might I be able to barter for my first trade? And as I was thinking that, staring at my pile of paper clips, the head of the executive secretary pool popped her head in my office and asked me if I had Green Pack 42. And I did not know what this was, but I didn't have anything else to do. So I helped her wander this 12-story office building looking for Green Pack 42. And all a Green Pack is a literal green file folder. And when members of Congress or other agencies would write an official letter to VA, our official response would go in this green folder, and anybody that had to weigh in on it in the building would get the folder in their office eventually. And it became pretty clear to me pretty fast that ExecSec was spending most of their time wandering around this building trying to find these folders. And in the course of hunting on the 8th floor, I found a closet of unused barcode scanners. And so I thought, ooh, what if I printed a barcode? I used, my programming skills. I print a barcode on the front of these file folders, and when they landed on someone's desk, they could check it in by scanning it with the barcode scanner. And so I called this folder finder, and I did it in like a Friday afternoon. And the ExecSec started calling it M-Boop, M for Marina and Boop for the sound that it made when you heard people checking in the barcode scanners around the office building. And I unwittingly had just made my first paperclip trade, which was I had this enormous political capital with some of the most powerful people in any agency, which is the executive secretary pool, right? And then a few weeks later, the VA was slated to launch the first website after healthcare.gov. All listeners, I'm sure, know healthcare.gov went super swimmingly, so nobody was concerned about this. And VA was in a bad place at the time. Nobody trusted us to do anything, let alone launch a new website post healthcare.gov. And so they performance tested the new website, and it crashed at 8 users. So people are panicking at the VA that this is not going to go well. And someone from ExecSec was in the room and said, oh, that Marina, she printed barcodes. Maybe she can help save the tool. And so looped me into the meeting. Neither one had really nothing to do with the other, but because of that political capital and trust I had earned, I was invited to the meeting. I got together with a couple of other presidential innovation fellows who at that point, the second cohort had landed. I was a CTO of the agency, and we rebuilt the tool with JavaScript using GitHub Pages over a weekend. And it performed so well that it actually crashed the performance testing computer. And I had to swear to White House comms on my firstborn, who still doesn't exist. I don't have any kids, but I swore on my firstborn nonetheless that the website was not going to crash if President Obama announced it. And he did, and it did not crash, and the website was up. And so that earned me a lot more political capital, sort of my second paperclip trade. And I just kept there's more stories in the book about my subsequent trades. But by the time I left the VA, I had a headcount of about 75 people and a multi-million-dollar budget and at least 3 like really thriving projects in my portfolio. And at this point, the VA, if anybody listening is from the VA, like they have a whole office of the CTO with like hierarchy and stuff. So those paper clips really set the stage. And the purpose of the story is really for you to think about wherever you are in an organization, you may not have any resources, you may not have any headcount, but you have something of value. Maybe you're great at event planning. Maybe you're great at speaking. Maybe you can bake. I mean, really, whatever skills you have at your disposal are opportunities for you to help others, meet others, and find ways that you can band together to accomplish bigger goals.
Well, and at that time too, I mean, your title was even pretty vague. I mean, even though it was, you were performing the role of chief technology officer, didn't you have some, very bureaucratic title like special advisor or something like that? And what that jumped out at me as, being able to lead from anywhere and not having to take all of your credibility from, some given title or some understood role that anyone can be a leader if you have some of this creativity.
Yeah, I had been recruited, and in all my interviews and discussions, the role was referred to as the chief technology officer. And I had a predecessor, Peter Levin, who was known as the chief technology officer of the VA. But when I was actually signing my paperwork, I learned that Peter had bureaucracy hacked his way into that title, and that was not actually the title at all. The title was a senior advisor to the secretary, which is, not a C-suite title, right? But people kept referring to me as the CTO, and now that role actually does have that title. But at the time, I was a bit surprised to learn that the title even was made up.
So a quote from the book that jumped out at me, couldn't see that knowledge of acronyms, departments, and even some of their personal relationships meant that they experienced the VA in a fundamentally different way than a veteran on the outside experienced it. And to me, this really highlights some key themes from the book, looking at these ideas of communication, curiosity, and kindness. So would love to hear more about why these concepts, really shine through in the book and through the experiences and through your career?
Yeah, I mean, the VA hires a tremendous number of veterans, and in sort of a dark twist, uh, those veterans often believed that they understood the experience of all veterans because they were
Mm-hmm.
veterans, but they were veterans working at the VA, right? So, as you said in that quote, they understood the acronyms. If they were struggling with a disability claim, they knew to call Debbie, which was something that on the outside, your average veteran did not know. They
Mm-hmm.
still had a completely valid, they are still veterans with a completely valid experience, but they weren't able to, nobody is able to represent the experiences of all veterans. And so something I really tried to do was approach problems with a sense of curiosity, leaving the office as much as humanly possible. Like my first 6 months
Mm-hmm.
were spent almost entirely in VA offices and hospitals, watching, with their permission, real veterans go through the claims process, get disability exams, try to navigate the VA. And I kept seeing them uh, fail to do so. They would get stuck, they would get blocked, they would not have a way forward, they would guess an incorrect way forward. And that really opened my eyes to the fact that it was our job at the VA to make the VA work wherever you entered, right? Whoever you called, whatever door you
Mm-hmm.
used, that needed to be the right door, instead of expecting veterans to understand how the VA operated.
Another key concept that I know GovLove listeners will relate to, and it's definitely been a founding principle of ELGL in general, it is silo busting and ways that we break down these, bureaucratic buckets that we put our work into. But you write that it's not just about busting those silos, that you need to look between the silos. Tell us more about this and some examples of looking between silos.
Yeah, so the book has 56 bureaucracy hacking tactics in it. And this is hands down my favorite. And it's one that keeps working no matter where I am or what I'm doing. And the idea
Mm-hmm.
is the larger, the older, the more storied a bureaucracy becomes, the more siloed it gets. I think that sounds familiar to the audience. But the
Mm-hmm.
space between the silos is often completely undefended and very ripe for change. And that might be handoffs, that might be data transmission. And so really I encourage whatever problem you're trying to work on, follow real examples, real claims, real people, real cases, applications, whatever it may be, real ones from start to finish. When you follow processes abstractly, you miss out on some of the real opportunities at the handoffs, because the handoffs are usually at best broken or slower
Mm-hmm.
or missing a translation that could be made more easily. And probably my favorite story here is from my foster care work. I work a lot on foster parent licensing processes and streamlining them because when I first started working on this problem, it would take most states hundreds of days to process these applications, during which time there could literally be toddlers sleeping on the floor of the office for want of a
Mm-hmm.
home that is available but can't get through the paperwork process. And so a lot of these were very siloed steps. There'd be a background check that never talked to the home inspection check that never talked to the medical report check, and on and on. And so I was in a particular state following the process from start to finish when I get to a woman whose step was to request the applicant's driving record from the DMV. And she pulls out a carbon copy form, which for any of your younger listeners, it's like 3 levels of colored paper that you press really hard on, and it will press what you're writing through the bottom layers of paper. And she's complaining to me the entire time she's filling out this form. The DMV, they live in the 19th century. Why do they require this stupid old carbon form? She doesn't even have an
Mm-hmm.
envelope or a stamp. Like, what is up? And so I, watch this as neutrally as possible. And then I do what she was not empowered to do, which was I then went to the DMV and I said, hey, could you show me how you're processing the driving record request? And the woman there sits down and says, oh, yeah, they come in through our electronic system. I get the request here on the left. I usually fulfill them within an hour. And I said, well, wait a minute, where does the carbon copy paper come in? And she says, oh my God, you were at child welfare. Those people live in the 19th century. They keep sending me this carbon copy paper in the mail. What is even wrong with them? Why don't they email their requests like everybody else? And so I was able to, that same afternoon, introduce these two people, remove
Mm-hmm.
the carbon copy paper entirely, and shave 32 days off a
Mm-hmm.
very lengthy process with no resistance, no objection. Everybody was happier and better off for it. And I find opportunities like that constantly in my work. And looking between the silos is something you can do, whether you're entry level, if you're literally the CEO, anyone in between. It's an opportunity where through that kind of shadowing and understanding how the end-to-end process works, you can find a lot of opportunities in between the silos. And then you start building the political capital, the data sharing agreements, the IT knowledge, whatever it may be that you need to start changing the siloed areas.
Mm-hmm. And for our listeners, every chapter ends with a section called How Can I Use This? And it really is a nice, succinct summary of everything you learned in the chapter. But the other thing that I found very useful was how practical it is for for people at different stages in their career, either, where they are personally in their career, if they're brand new in an agency. And you have some great suggestions for how you use, your first 6 months on the job most productively to ask those tough questions and to, make sure that you're, asking the right questions and not just making assumptions. And so could you share a little bit more about some of those observations of how you use that time effectively, but then how you also honor the lived experiences and the history of agency decisions, at the same time?
Yeah, it's some complex math, but something when you're new to a role or a team, the best thing you can do is play the newbie card. Ask
Hmm.
the seemingly simple questions because the more senior your peers and colleagues are, the less safe it is for them to ask questions, right? If you've been in charge of a process for 5 years, however well intentioned you are and however amazing of a leader you are, you can't ask, well, wait a minute, how does that work again? 5 years into your leadership term.
Right.
But when you're a new person, you can ask those questions a lot. And in the course of researching the book, we actually found many examples where senior employees would knowingly seek out new employees and ask them to ask questions on their behalf because it was not a safe place for them to ask anymore. And so I think acknowledging that and creating a sense of safety for people is really critical. I think sometimes it can be tempting as a bureaucracy hacker to have a gotcha or to call people out or make it apparent that somebody doesn't know the answer to something. That is not great for your relationship with them and doesn't really
Hmm.
move any needles forward. So another story we tell in the book on those lines are one thing, if you're new, definitely play the newbie card, as I just mentioned. But another angle is how can you make a safe place for people to learn something that you need them to learn? And one of my favorite stories here is in the federal government. When I was early on in my time at the VA, there was a push to get all federal agencies to adopt an API policy. And if you explain an API to someone who, for the first time, it sounds very scary, right? You're going to connect, to my computer that's full of personal veteran data. Like, why on earth would I allow that? That's such a security violation. And so the policy got tremendous immediate pushback. And it became
Hmm.
kind of clear that a lot of that was coming from a place that people didn't understand that APIs can have really strict and rigid permissions and data security around it. So a colleague of mine held a session. It was called APIs for Executives. And it was held in a fancy room at the White House. Only senior executives at agencies were invited to it. And it was, again, not meant at all to embarrass anybody or call anybody out in any way. It was to create a safe space where it was like, hey, we know everybody here knows all about APIs, but just in case, here's a little bit of a refresher. And so it was a safe space to teach and learn some basics about how APIs worked in a place that people saw themselves respected and that they belonged there, right? They're not going to come to an intro class on their own. And so I think about that a lot, which is how can I make, if it becomes apparent to me that somebody doesn't understand the nuances or the weeds of an issue, how can I make it easy and safe for them to get up to speed?
And that theme of using, again, kindness and just really being understanding of how humans react, especially to change and to a sense that, someone is going to come in and fix something that they're working on that they've been proud of. It really weaves throughout the book, and I appreciate that because I think it adds a level of humanity that sometimes we don't see when we're talking about things like innovation and change. Um, Share with us more about why you see a problem with the word just, especially when it relates to promoting change or doing something differently.
Absolutely. And I have been very guilty of this myself. So this is one of those chapters that I need to reread on a regular basis, especially when you're new to an area or a problem. It can be very tempting to look at it and say, oh, the problem is just X, or why don't you just do Y? And it turns out when you encounter something that seems like an obvious solution, and we call this tactic in the book literally beware the obvious solution, it's probably not such an obvious solution. There is probably a good reason. And nothing will turn you off more from the people that have been there for a while or build more distrust than if you would say that out loud. Well, why don't you all just do, whatever, just hire a bunch of new people? Why don't you just automate this? It's never that simple. And you are almost certainly not the first or even the 100th person to encounter this. So we really encourage, maybe you notice something that you think could be a solution. Keep that to yourself for a little while and start understanding more from the people who have been around it about why that may be a lot more complicated or what solutions they have or what's been tried before. I was extremely lucky. The same woman, Bonnie, who popped her head in my office looking for that green pack in the paperclip story, at some point many months later, I was in a meeting where the VA was going to have a great brand new idea. And the brand new idea was, what if a veteran could update their mailing address in one place instead of in 83 different places? And everybody in that meeting is riled up about this. Of course, why haven't we done this before? We should absolutely just allow veterans to do this in one place. And Bonnie came to me after that meeting and said, hey, Marina, I want to show you something. And brought me to a room in her office, and it had a shelf of 18 binders on it. And the binders were from the last 18 times that the VA had tried that exact project and failed. And it was in reading the past binders and understanding, oh, this person were on that the last 2 times. Let me go talk to them about what went wrong. That revealed some of the mistakes that were made over and over because people kept approaching it as an easy problem that no one had thought of before to solve, rather than something that had been attempted many, many times with a lot of lessons learned. And now the VA, you can update your mailing address in one place. And it's because it learned the 19th time, learned from the previous 18 times of what not to do and what approach might actually be successful. I actually have a text expander shortcut on my computer that if I type the word just, it will automatically delete it, just as a reminder to myself that that is not a word to use.
And such a great reminder for all of us. And again, I think too, it just shows how throughout your career, it's honoring the experiences of the agencies that you're hacking. And I think that just, again, adds that very human element to the work that you've done. I also want to talk about the fact that you use the term Horcruxes. And I don't have any proof, but I do think that there is a solid percentage of GovLove listeners who are also Harry Potter fans. But I would love to hear more and for you to share how Horcruxes relate to hacking bureaucracy.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you have not heard Harry Potter, or you don't know the story, and you want to still listen or read it, you should skip ahead 2 minutes. And so in this case, to me, Voldemort in the Harry Potter books is an exact analogy for mainframe or legacy computers and even just legacy policies and process in government. People are always trying to destroy it head on in a big bang 10-year replacement. And so for the first 6.5 books of Harry Potter, everybody's trying to kill Voldemort directly. In the course of doing so, half of Harry's family dies, there's billions of pounds of Muggle property damage, and Voldemort is stronger than ever. But what does work is the discovery of the Horcruxes, that you can slowly destroy Voldemort's power piece by piece without him even really realizing it until a few have been destroyed. And so that's the approach that I really recommend when you're trying to update any big project of any kind. It's easier to talk about in IT, but it doesn't just have to be a technology solution, where instead of trying to replace the entire mainframe computer, redo the entire process, rejigger an entire huge team or department, what's one piece that you can chunk off and you can do really well? And then you can repeat that one more time and one more time. This technique worked really well during the height of the COVID pandemic when a lot of states were struggling with unemployment claims. A huge thing that everybody needed to do was they wanted to check their claim status. And the wrong approaches, the kill Voldemort directly approaches were, we are going to do claim status as part of our 10-year unemployment modernization plan. What really worked was things like the California did, which was in a course of, I think, 10 days, said, all right, once a night, the mainframe is going to spit out everybody's status in a spreadsheet. We're going to load that status into a cloud-enabled, easy-to-load website that works on everybody's mobile phones. And you're going to be able to check your status there. And critically, your status is not going to be error 104. it's going to be plain language that we tested with real users that's going to tell you, hey, either we got your claim or, hey, you actually need to submit this additional form or whatever that next step may be. And that was like 99% without exaggeration of most call volume was people just trying to get their claim status. And so by doing that, that one horcrux of building a claim status tracker and hanging it off the side of the mainframe, you got this tremendous piece of functionality, huge benefit to end users in, again, a matter of days. And I think we need to look for, in the book, we have a number of suggestions of places to look for possible horcruxes. But like a summary of it would be, if it's anything on paper, if it's anything that's really end to end and doesn't need to be exactly real time, it could be, every 12 hours or every 24 hours worth of data. That gives you a chance to do something really, really optimally well and not get stuck behind a 10-year master plan those never work. I've never, ever seen a 10-year master plan work.
Well, it could just be so daunting and discouraging. You think about like the morale and making sure that folks feel like they're making a difference. And yeah, like defeating Voldemort is a huge issue. But as you write, like finding the ring or the diadem and defeating that is a much easier task.
Yeah, and it worked. Like that, defeating Voldemort worked by going horcrux by horcrux. It didn't work by defeating him like head on.
Another section from the book that I think is noteworthy, you write, bureaucracies fall in love with the details and entirely miss the destination. They pour all of their efforts into making comprehensive multi-year plans in lieu of starting to make any actual changes and improvements or asking how the world will be any different after its plan is complete. Talk with us about North Stars and your advice for local governments and how they can start developing and using the North Star concept.
Yeah, so a North Star was critical to me at the VA. I called it the 21st Century VA Plan, which was slightly ironic because we wrote it in 2013, which was 13 years into the 21st century, but there we were. And it was not particularly detailed. It had 48 ideas. Each idea had maybe 2 sentences, if not 1 sentence. What if the VA had a single digital front door? What if you could enroll in healthcare instantly? And it had the concept of where we wanted to head, but did not have the implementation details. And I found that to be really critical. It got a lot of buy-in. It got people excited about the future, but it didn't mean that we had to figure out every last detail before we started heading toward that North Star. So like, for example, to combine the Horcrux story with this, I imagined a one single digital front door for veterans where they could manage and access all of their benefits. And when I started at the VA, we had literally over 1,500 websites, 83 benefit lines. And despite having so many websites, most of them weren't available online at all. Maybe you could download, print a PDF and mail it in, but that was about it. And so the wrong approach, I think, would have been to try to understand every last benefit line and plan perfectly that like in 6 years, we were going to launch one big website. And instead, what we did was we took one piece. And in the beginning, it was literally, and this is something that local governments could really do very quickly and very, very well. I think New Jersey also was a great example of this. And it's, can you start with plain language? Can you just explain, and I just said I caught myself. Can you explain in simple words that you run by real users and tweak until everybody's understanding them fully? How do you register for a business? How do you update your trash? Like whatever people's top user needs are, you don't have, your technology solution can start with plain language and ideally even translated language, right? So make sure it's available in other languages that your constituents need and start there so that you're reducing your customer support needs and you're increasing the ease at which your constituents can interact with you. And then you can start identifying, okay, now we need a little bit of automation, or now we need an electronic form, or maybe now we need a login to do, I really need to know who you are because it's, benefits or payment related. So we're going to do a higher NIST IAL2 kind of login. So I think having the North Star of what you ultimately envision the experience could be, and it could be 1 or 2 sentences, and then however incrementally, Horcrux by Horcrux, getting there is really the algorithm for success that I've seen work again and again.
And then I think another key quote, you write, it is an unfortunate belief of many people who want to change a bureaucracy that the best approach is to blow it up or break things. Don't do it. With this very blunt reminder, you make sure that we understand that yes, we all live and work within many bureaucracies, and then it's really about making them work to your advantage. And you even use the comparison that hacking a bureaucracy is more like judo than karate. Share with us more about what you mean, and why folks should be aware that it's not about moving fast and breaking things. It's really about figuring out how to work within these systems.
Yeah, so in the course of writing our book, we tried to find places that were not bureaucracies, and we were completely unsuccessful. Our research even took us to a cooperative grocery store in Berkeley, California, and it turns out it was also a bureaucracy. So I think the tendency to want to blow it up, go around it, ignore it, that might work once. I've certainly seen it work once, but it will never work again for you or for anybody that tries to follow in your footsteps for the next 30 years, because bureaucracies have storied memories. And so really what we want to encourage you, and Nick actually wanted to call the book Judo Not Karate, but I could not keep the two straight. I kept reversing karate and judo. So it was my fault that we had to change titles. But the idea is, and hopefully I get this, I keep them straight this time now that I've been studying. In judo, you use your opponent's movements and strengths against them. So you aren't like punching them. And maybe you don't punch in karate. So sorry, this is falling apart already. But a bureaucracy, you don't go around it. You don't avoid the rule. You don't ask for a waiver that the rules don't apply to you. You change the rules. You change the policy. You make the path of least resistance and the lowest risk path for people what you want them to do in service of your North Star. And a quick story here around this was when we tried to get cloud computing approved at the VA. And there was hurdle upon hurdle as we tried to fill out the IT security approval paperwork. One of the questions was, did I, Marina, jiggle the doorknob of the server room to prove that it was locked? Well, the cloud does not have a doorknob, so there's no doorknob to jiggle. And I tried every which way initially. I submitted the form with that question blank. It got rejected. I submitted it with written not applicable, it got rejected. I tried to explain metaphorically how I had jiggled the doorknob. It got kicked back. And eventually I realized, I think we have to change the form itself. And that ended up being a much simpler process than I realized. The form committee itself was maybe 5 people who all understood what I was trying to do. And then when I had my hands on changing the form, we got to think through, what other things what practices do we want to encourage or enforce through this process that weren't being enforced? For example, we had a computer with the Million Veterans Project, which was a VA's effort to sequence 1 million veterans' genomic data. It was on a computer with no backup in a mop closet underneath a fire sprinkler. And you don't have to be an IT expert to know that servers with no backups and water are not really a good combination. But that had passed all the security checks because those were never questions. So when we rewrote the form itself, we were able to change it so that actually now if your server had no backups, it had business hours, it was under a sprinkler, now you couldn't pass go, but we could pass go because we had skipped the doorknob jiggling question. And so I really encourage people, the more that you can follow that real process, the hiring process, the procurement process, the IT approval process, whatever you're feeling stuck by, and understand specifically where you're getting stuck, you might be able to change the bureaucracy itself. And that's really the judo move, so that the thing you need it to do is now the thing that everybody else is doing because it's in their performance plans, it's in their position descriptions, it's on the form as a required field, or whatever other shift you may need.
So what is next for you? What can we expect from Marina in 2023?
I'm doing a lot in foster care. I think that we're really excited about, in particular, a lot of work around expanding kin finding practices in child welfare. So right now, when kids enter foster care, about 34% of the time they're placed with kin. A kin may be grandma, it may be a baseball coach. It's someone that they already know and trust. And I think we can get that number to 80%. And thanks to my 26 state working group, we have a lot of the puzzle pieces, but we haven't deployed all the puzzle pieces in all the places. So a lot of my 2023 is going to be focused on that. And anybody that is even vaguely interested in foster care can check them out at childwelfareplaybook.com.
And where can our listeners buy the book if they would like to get their own copy after listening to this episode?
That would be awesome. Hack Your Bureaucracy is available anywhere books are sold. It's on Amazon, bookshop.org, Barnes & Noble, and it's also available in ebook and an Audible version.
So I want to thank you for joining ELGL for this episode. Before we close out, a question that we always ask our guests is why government? Why public service? Why do you do this important and meaningful work?
I may have an unconventional answer for much of your audience. That I am and have always been a diehard libertarian. And I entered government believing that it didn't work, and I wanted to prove that to myself. I was completely wrong. And I was lucky to learn from a lot of master bureaucracy hackers very early on. And I just fell in love with the ability to serve people at scale. And between the helping veterans and now helping children in foster care, like there's a lot of solutions that are kind of right there that, and it's very, very satisfying. And I think you certainly sleep well at night knowing the kind of scale and impact that you can have. So I can't imagine doing that from anywhere else.
I love it. And again, that idea of sleeping well at night or reflecting back on a career of service, I think that's something that everyone can relate to. So thank you. Our true last question, if you could be the GovLove DJ, what song would you pick as our exit music for this episode?
My favorite exit song generally is Out of the Woods by Taylor Swift. I think it's got the right tempo with the drums.
Love it. Great choice. There will be no controversy with that pick, unlike your chocolate and pillow comment. But again, thank you so much for coming on and talking with us and sharing more about the book, Hack Your Bureaucracy.
Perfect. Thanks so much for having me.
GovLove is produced by a rotating cast of ELGL volunteers. ELGL is the Engaging Local Government Leaders Network. You can reach us on Twitter at GovLove Podcast. And if you'd like to get involved with the new network we're building at the Beck Center in partnership with U.S. Digital Response, the Digital Service Network, please visit us at beckcenter.georgetown.edu. We are a growing peer learning network that supports an open, collaborative, and nimble network of government leaders who use technology, data, and design to improve and innovate public services. Thank you for listening. This has been GovLove, a podcast about local government.